At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1942, a 43-year-old Navy captain stood under a battered A-20 bomber, knowing his family was starving inside a Japanese prison camp in Manila. The 5th Air Force was losing aircraft faster than America could replace them. Convoys slipped through untouched. Crews were dying every week. Everyone said the war in New Guinea was unwinnable. But that morning, Captain Paul Gunn decided to do something no engineer, no commander, and no rulebook approved. He would rebuild American bombers into low-flying gunships powerful enough to break Japan's supply lines. The only question was, would he survive long enough to prove it? If you want to see how Pappy's gunship changed the war, hit like and subscribe for more forgotten stories. In July alone, the 3rd Attack Group had lost 11 A-20s trying to hit Japanese convoys from high altitude. Bombardiers couldn't touch moving ships, and when the pilots dropped lower, the deck gunners tore them apart. Captain Ed Lenner had watched 3 of his own crews burn in the Coral Sea just days earlier. Japan was reinforcing New Guinea whenever it wanted, but Gunn saw something everyone else missed. If a bomber flew low enough to skip a bomb across the water, like a stone, it could strike a ship at point-blank range. The problem was surviving long enough to get that close. But to hit a convoy up close, the bombers had to survive the run-in first. That meant blasting through the wall of Japanese deck guns with sheer forward firepower. In other words, turning the A-20 into a straight-line killer. The problem was obvious. The Havoc's 4.30 caliber guns were useless against ship armor. They might as well have been throwing pebbles. Gunn needed 50 calibers, 4 of them, mounted where the bombardier once sat, all firing forward at nearly 1,700 rounds per minute. General George Kenney gave him just 1 week to prove the idea wasn't suicide. Gunn scavenged 50 caliber guns from wrecked P-39 and P-40 fighters. The pilots long gone, but the guns still deadly. He mounted them on a steel frame inside the A-20's nose. Each gun weighed 64 pounds, plus 200 pounds of ammunition, pushing the plane's center of gravity dangerously forward. The first test flight nearly killed the pilot. The Havoc struggled to climb, fighting to stay level, threatening to nose over. Gunn spent 2 grueling days shifting equipment and adjusting the tail trim until the bomber finally flew. Angry, unstable, but ready. Gunn shifted equipment aft and fine-tuned the tail trim. The second test pilot later reported the bomber flew like it was alive with anger, but it flew. On September 12th, 16 of these modified A-20s struck the Japanese airfield at Buuna, coming in at treetop level with guns hammering. 14 enemy aircraft were destroyed on the ground, and every anti-aircraft position was silenced. Not a single A-20 was lost. General Kenney wanted more, but the Havoc had limits. Its range couldn't reach Japanese bases across the Owen Stanley Mountains, and its bomb load was far too light for larger targets. Gunn realized the A-20 wasn't enough. He needed a bigger platform, the B-25 Mitchell, with longer range, heavier payload, and room for more guns. In December, he stripped the bombardier and nose guns from a B-25C, installing 4.50 caliber guns in the nose, 4 more in external cheek tacks, and rotating the top turret forward. 10 forward-firing guns in total. Then he added 2 more on each side, bringing the total to 14. 215 pounds of lead screaming per second. The ground crew laughed, calling it Pappy's folly, but Gunn knew it was about to change the war. Gunn flew the prototype to Charter's towers to show the 3rd Attack Group what his impossible gunship could do. The plane was nose-heavy, threatening to drop out of the sky on takeoff. He held full back pressure on the stick just to keep it level, but once airborne, the B-25 became a flying destroyer. Impressed, General Kenny ordered 12 more conversions immediately. The 81st Air Depot Group in Townsville worked around the clock, 18-hour days, to modify every available B-25 and turn Gunn's vision into an unstoppable force. If you want to see how Pappy's gunship changed the war, hit like and subscribe for more forgotten stories. By February 1943, 30 of Gunn's strafers were ready for combat. Then General Kenny sent the blueprints to engineers back in Ohio. The Army Air Force studied the modifications for 3 days, then sent a blunt message back to Australia. The planes were impractical. The balance was wrong. Too heavy. Wouldn't fly properly. Every modified B-25 should be grounded immediately. Kenny, standing in Washington when the message arrived, read it and couldn't help but smirk. He already knew the planes were about to prove every doubter wrong. Kenny walked into General Arnold's office, where the engineers from Ohio were ready to tell him why Pappy Gunn's gunship was impossible. Kenny didn't wait. He told them 12 of those so-called impossible planes had just played a decisive role in destroying a Japanese convoy in the Bismarck Sea. Every transport sunk. 60 more strafers were already being modified in Australia. Arnold practically ran the engineers out of the room. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea began with intelligence intercepts on February 28, 1943, setting the stage for a turning point in New Guinea. Allied codebreakers in Melbourne had intercepted Japanese naval messages. A convoy was leaving Rabat. 8 transport ships, 8 destroyer escorts, carrying nearly 7,000 troops bound for New Guinea's north coast. General Kenny had just 72 hours to stop them. The convoy would cross the Bismarck Sea, a 400-mile stretch of open water. The Japanese commanders counted on the monsoon season to shield them. Low clouds, heavy rain, near-zero visibility. Allied bombers couldn't strike what they couldn't see. The Japanese were right about the weather, but dead wrong about the bombers. On March 2nd, Allied reconnaissance planes spotted the convoy steaming south through the Vitiaz Strait. B-17 Flying Fortresses attacked from 15,000 feet, weaving through cloud breaks. They dropped 137 bombs and claimed multiple hits, but post-battle analysis told the real story. Nothing sank. High-altitude bombing against moving ships simply didn't work. The convoy kept pressing on. That night, the transports scattered, hugging the coast of New Guinea, untouched and on course for their destination. The destroyers formed a protective screen, and Japanese commanders believed they'd reach Leyte by dawn on March 4th. Ready to unload troops under fighter cover, they thought the war in New Guinea was tipping in their favor, but they had no idea what awaited them at first light. That evening, Captain Ed Lenner briefed the 92nd Bomb Squadron at Port Moresby. 12 B-25 strafers, 30 modified A-20 Havocs, Royal Australian Air Force fighters on top cover, and P-38 Lightnings assigned to handle the Japanese Zeros. Every piece was in place for a strike no one expected. The strafers would come in at mast height, barely 50 feet above the water, close enough to taste the ocean's spray. At that altitude, every run was point blank. The plan looked brutally simple: overwhelm the deck gunners with a wall of 50 caliber fire, skip bomb the transports while they were stunned, and get out before the Zeros showed up. Lerner had flown this tactic once, just once. During the briefing, his navigator asked what they'd do if the strafers took fire on the approach. Lerner didn't blink. "We'll find out tomorrow." The briefing ended at 2200 hours. Nobody slept. At 0630 on March 3rd, the strike force gathered over Cape Ward Hunt. 137 aircraft ready for battle. The B-17s would go first, attacking from high altitude to draw the Japanese defensive fire upward. Then the strafers would move in low. The convoy was 70 miles northwest of Lely when the B-17s arrived, ripping through scattered clouds. The transports opened fire with every gun, black puffs of flak erupting around the bombers. One B-17 took heavy damage and was forced to turn back, but the rest pressed on. Then the strafers appeared. Elner led the B-25 in from the southeast, flying at wave-top height, guns blazing, ready to unleash havoc. 12 B-25 strafers, each with 14 forward-firing guns, 168 barrels of lead in total, swept in like a wall of firepower, 300 yards wide. The Japanese crew aboard the transport Kyoku Shimaru spotted them at 2 miles. The ship's captain ordered a hard turn to starboard. Too late. At 800 yards, the B-25s opened fire. The 50 caliber rounds tore across the water like a chainsaw, ripping through the superstructure, shredding the bridge, and cutting down the anti-aircraft crews before they could even traverse their guns. 3 B-25s dropped bombs at just 100 yards, finishing the devastation. The first bomb skipped across the water, smashing into the hull below the waterline and detonating in the engine room. The second hit midship. The third missed entirely. Kyoku Maru was dead in the water within 30 seconds, burning, listing to port, doomed to sink in 40 minutes. That was just the first transport. But Teo Maru tried to escape. Engines pushed to full speed at 15 knots. The B-25 strafers were doing 240 knots. The math was simple. 4 strafers bracketed Teo Maru from both sides, guns blazing, leaving no room to maneuver. Streams of 50 caliber fire tore across the deck. Anti-aircraft crews were cut down at their guns. Bridge windows exploded. The ship's executive officer took 3 rounds to the chest, and the captain lasted only 10 more seconds before a burst finished him. The strafers dropped 8 bombs, 5 hit. The transport split in 2. Japanese soldiers trapped below deck had no chance. Most never reached the surface. The ship sank in 6 minutes. Survivors plunged into the Bismarck Sea, weighed down by full combat gear, disappearing beneath the waves. Australian bowfighters strafed the decks of the destroyer Shikami as it tried to protect the transports. One fighter took hits from anti-aircraft fire, but the pilot pressed on. His forward guns shredded the deck from bow to stern, cutting down every Japanese gun crew. By the time the B-25 strafers arrived, Shikami had no defense. 3 strafers attacked from different angles. The destroyer tried to maneuver, but it was too slow. Bombs struck the port side, starboard side, and amidships. Shikami didn't sink immediately, but it was finished. Dead in the water, fires spreading, the crew abandoned ship 2 hours later. By 9 a.m. on March 3rd, the Japanese convoy was scattered across 40 square miles of ocean. 5 transports were sinking or burning, 2 destroyers crippled. The remaining ships tried to flee, but they didn't make it. The B-25 strafers returned at 1400 with fresh bombs and full ammunition loads. The Japanese had no fighter cover. The Zeros had landed at Leyte to refuel. When the second wave arrived, the transport Io Maru took 12 bomb hits. Its magazine detonated in a massive explosion, visible all the way from Port Moresby, 130 miles away. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no survivors. 1,800 Japanese soldiers were gone in seconds. Captain Ed Lerner strafed low over the transport Owawa Maru. His co-pilot counted 14 separate fires blazing across the deck. Japanese soldiers leapt overboard, while the anti-aircraft guns were silent. Lerner's bombardier released 2 bombs at point-blank range. Both hit. The transport settled by the stern and capsized. Meanwhile, the modified A-20 Havocs hunted the crippled destroyers, finishing the survivors of the convoy. The destroyer Asashio tried to rescue survivors from the water, but 3 A-20s attacked from different directions. The crew, focused on rescue, never saw the strafers until the guns opened fire. Bombs tore into the forward deck and bridge. Asashio burned through the night and sank at dawn on March 4th. By the evening of March 3rd, the Japanese convoy was annihilated. 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers destroyed. Of nearly 7,000 troops who had left Rabat, fewer than 1,200 reached Lely. 2,700 were rescued and returned to Rabat, and the rest were lost to the Bismarck Sea. Allied losses were light: 4 aircraft, 1 B-17 and 3 P-38s, 13 aircrew killed. General MacArthur called it one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. The Japanese never again tried to reinforce New Guinea by convoy. The war in the Southwest Pacific had turned, and it turned because of Paul Gunn's impossible gunship. Back in Australia, the engineers in Ohio were drafting reports explaining why the B-25 modifications could never work. On March 5th, Kenny sent a message to General Hap Arnold in Washington. The subject line read, "Commerce Destroyer Modifications Approved for Production." The body of the message was short and to the point. 12 B-25 strafers had just destroyed an entire Japanese convoy. Kenny requested the immediate integration of the forward gun package into all B-25 production aircraft. That afternoon, General Arnold called J.H. Dutch Kindleberger, President of North American Aviation. Kindleberger insisted his engineers needed to inspect the modifications. Arnold replied that he was sending the man who designed them, Paul Gunn himself. Gunn didn't want to leave Australia, but duty called. Paul Gunn's wife, Polly, and their 4 children were still trapped in the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. The Japanese had held them since January 1942. 14 long months. Gunn flew every mission, hoping he could inch closer to liberating the Philippines. Going to California felt like flying in the wrong direction, but Kenny's order was clear. The 5th Air Force needed factory-built strafers, hundreds of them, and Gunn was the only man who could show North American aviation how to do it right. The general promised Gunn he would be back in the Pacific within 6 weeks. On March 27, 1943, Gunn landed in Long Beach, California. The North American aviation plant sprawled across 140 acres, with 20,000 workers on 3 shifts. The assembly line was turning out 1 B-25 every 4 hours. Factory engineers pored over Gunn's hand-drawn blueprints. They asked about stress calculations. He had none. They asked about wind tunnel testing. He'd tested it by flying. They asked about the center of gravity. Gunn shrugged. This was how he built a flying destroyer. Gunn showed them how he had moved the radio equipment aft to balance the plane. One engineer warned that the modifications would buckle the fuselage or round the cheek gun mounts. The muzzle blast from the .50 caliber guns would tear the aluminum. Gunn simply said it didn't. Then he revealed the blast tubes he'd welded to extend beyond the propeller arc. Problem solved. Over the next 2 weeks, factory engineers reverse-engineered his field modifications into production drawings, reinforcing the nose structure to handle the firepower. The engineers redesigned the gun mounts and added heavier-gauge aluminum patches to reinforce the fuselage. They calculated the exact center of gravity shift and adjusted the tail trim. On May 10, 1943, the first factory-built B-25G Strafer rolled off the assembly line. 4 .50 caliber guns in the solid nose and a 75mm M4 cannon in the forward fuselage. The cannon used the same ammunition as the M3 Lee tank. One shell could punch a destroyer below the waterline. Gunn test flew the prototype. When the 75mm cannon fired, it recoiled 4 feet. The entire aircraft shuddered. Period. The navigator had to manually reload the 75mm cannon between shots, 1 round every 30 seconds. Gunn assured the engineers it would work against ships, maybe not anything faster. North American Aviation built 400 B-25G Strafers, then improved the design. The B-25H added 4 more .50 caliber guns in the cheek packs, 8 in the nose, 4 in the cheeks, and 2 in the top turret rotated forward. 14 forward-firing guns in total. The H model retained the 75mm cannon, but added a better recoil system. The navigator could reload faster, increasing the rate of fire to 1 round every 20 seconds. The B-25J removed the 75mm cannon and added 4 more .50 caliber guns, 18 forward-firing guns in total, making it the most heavily armed production bomber in history. North American Aviation built 4,900 B-25Js, delivering the first to the Pacific in October 1943. Gunn returned to Australia in May, exactly 6 weeks after leaving. His family was still trapped in Manila. Meanwhile, the strafers kept hunting. In April 1943, B-25s destroyed 16 Japanese barges carrying troops and supplies near Finschhafen. In May, they sank 12 cargo ships at Wewak Harbor. In June, they struck the oil facilities at Balikpapan on Borneo. The Japanese stopped moving supplies by ship in daylight, but it didn't help. The strafers adapted, attacking at night using radar. They learned to skip bombs from 50 feet in complete darkness and to coordinate with PT boats that lit targets with searchlights at the last second. The Japanese called the modified B-25s the Black Death, and they weren't wrong. On November 2nd, 1943, Major Ben Fridge led 4 squadrons of strafers into Rabaul Harbor, 137 Allied aircraft in total, including 59 B-25s. The harbor held 38 Japanese vessels, cruisers, destroyers, tankers, cargo ships, and minesweepers. The strafers flew at masthead height through phosphorus smoke that blinded the anti-aircraft gunners. They attacked from multiple directions at once. The Japanese couldn't track them all. In just 15 minutes, 30 ships were hit, 5 sunk outright, 12 damaged beyond repair. The rest of the Japanese ships limped away. Rabaul Harbor was finished as a forward supply base. Gunn flew that mission himself. He was 44, a special projects officer on headquarters staff. He didn't have to fly combat, but his family was still in Manila, and every mission brought him closer. Intelligence from the Santo Tomas internment camp was grim. Food rations slashed, medicine running out, prisoners dying from malnutrition and disease. The Japanese camp commander had informed the Red Cross that all prisoners would be executed if Allied forces approached Manila. Gunn told Kenny he wanted to fly the first mission over Manila when liberation came. Kenny promised he could. The strafers evolved through 1944, some carrying 8 5-inch high-velocity rockets under the wings, others loaded with napalm tanks. Some carried parafrag bombs, small fragmentation bombs with parachutes that allowed B-25s to drop them from minimal altitude without catching themselves in the blast. The most deadly tactic was the combined strike. B-24 Liberators would bomb from 20,000 feet, forcing defenders to look up. Then the strafers would come in low. By the time the gunners looked down, the B-25s were already on them. In the first 8 months of 1944, 5th Air Force strafers destroyed 947 Japanese aircraft on the ground, sank 273 ships, and killed an estimated 38,000 soldiers. The modified B-25s had become the decisive weapon in the Southwest Pacific campaign. Gunn continued innovating. He added extra fuel tanks to extend range, improved gun cooling systems, and developed new ammunition loading techniques that increased rate of fire. Some B-25s carried modifications that existed nowhere else, invented by Gunn the night before a mission. Other theater commanders wanted strafers. Kenny sent them the blueprints. Across the globe, modified B-25s were making their mark. In the Mediterranean, they attacked German convoys supplying North Africa. In the China-Burma-India theater, they struck Japanese supply lines along the Burma Road. Gunn's concept, proven in Brisbane, spread to every combat zone. On October 20th, 1944, American forces landed at Leyte in the Philippines. The liberation of Manila was just 3 months away. Gunn's family had been imprisoned for nearly 3 years. He was flying multiple missions every day, telling his crew chief he wouldn't stop until they were free. On November 27, 1944, at 0330 hours, Japanese bombers struck Tacubon Airfield, 56 aircraft, Mitsubishi G4M Betty. Bombers escorted by Zero fighters. They came in low from the north. Radar operators spotted them too late. Gunn was in the operations tent, reviewing mission plans for the morning strike, when the first bombs hit. The tent sat just 200 yards from the main runway. Too close. The blast wave knocked him off his feet. Shrapnel tore through the canvas walls. One fragment struck his left leg. Another tore into his shoulder. The medical officer found Gunn trying to stand, blood soaking through his flight suit. He said he needed to check on his aircraft. The doctor insisted he needed surgery. Gunn made it just 30 feet before collapsing. They evacuated him to the hospital at Leyte. The leg wound was severe. Shrapnel had severed an artery. The surgeon said he wouldn't fly again for at least 6 months, maybe longer. The injuries qualified him for medical retirement. 45 years old, 26 years of service across Navy and Army. He had earned the right to go home. Gunn told the surgeon he wasn't going anywhere until his family was free. The Battle of Manila began on February 3, 1945. American forces fought house to house through Manila. The Japanese had declared the city a fortress, defending every street. The battle was brutal. Building by building, block by block. On February 3rd, Santo Tomas internment camp was liberated. 3,700 Allied prisoners were freed. Gunn's wife, Polly, weighed just 89 pounds. His daughter, Julia, 63. They had survived on a single meal of rice and vegetable soup each day for the past year. His son, Nathaniel, suffered from malaria. His youngest daughter battled dysentery, but they were alive. Against medical orders, Gunn flew to Manila on February 4th. His leg was still bandaged, and he relied on a cane. The doctor had cleared him for light duty only. No combat flying. Gunn went to Santo Tomas anyway. He found his family in the makeshift hospital the Army had set up. At first, Polly didn't recognize him. He had lost 40 pounds since she last saw him in April 1942. 3 long years. His hair was completely gray. She thought he was a doctor until he said her name. Then she knew. The official Army report stated that Colonel Pappy Gunn was reunited with his family on February 4th, 1945, at Santo Tomas internment camp, Manila. The reunion lasted 4 hours. Then, Gunn returned to Leyte. Gunn's medical leave wasn't over, but the war wasn't finished. The modified B-25s kept flying. Other pilots, other crews, but his forward gun modifications. By the end of the war, North American aviation had built 9,600 B-25 Mitchell bombers. Nearly 5,000 were Strafer variants with forward gun packages based on Gunn's original design. Those strafers sank over 800 Japanese ships in the Pacific, destroyed more than 2,000 Japanese aircraft on the ground, and killed an estimated 85,000 Japanese soldiers. The commerce destroyer concept that engineers once called impossible had become the most effective anti-shipping weapon in the Pacific. Gunn never flew combat again. His leg wound had ended his operational career. The Army retired him as a full colonel on June 30, 1948, for medical disability. He was 48 years old. Gunn returned to the Philippines and rebuilt Philippine Airlines, the company he had started before the war. By 1946, operations resumed with 3 surplus C-47 transport aircraft. He flew routes between Manila, Cebu, Davao, and other Philippine cities, turning the airline into a post-war success. The airline he had built with just 5 Beechcraft planes before the war now spanned the entire Philippine archipelago. In 1947, the Philippine government awarded him the Distinguished Service Star. President Manuel Roxas personally presented the medal. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and exceptional service to the Republic of the Philippines during the Liberation Campaign." Colonel Gunn's innovative aircraft modifications directly contributed to the defeat of Japanese forces and the liberation of the Filipino people. The United States military had already recognized his heroism. Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Air Medal, and 9 Purple Hearts. The Distinguished Service Cross was recommended but never approved. Some officers believed his impact was technical, not tactical. They were wrong. General Kenny wrote in his memoir, "Pappy Gunn was the most valuable man in the 5th Air Force. His mechanical genius and combat innovations changed the course of the war in the Southwest Pacific. Without his strafer modifications, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea would have been a Japanese victory. Without Bismarck Sea, New Guinea might have fallen. Without New Guinea, the liberation of the Philippines would have been impossible." General MacArthur agreed. In a classified letter to the War Department dated July 1945, MacArthur recommended Gunn for promotion to Brigadier General. The recommendation was denied. The Army Air Force was reducing force structure and promotions were frozen. Gunn remained a colonel. He never complained. He had achieved what he fought for. His family was free. The Philippines were liberated. The Japanese were defeated. That was enough. Philippine Airlines grew steadily through the late 1940s and early 1950s. Gunn acquired DC-3s, then DC-4s, and later Convair 340s. The airline expanded routes to Hong Kong, Bangkok, and Singapore. By 1956, PAL was flying to San Francisco. Gunn's small inter-island airline had become an international carrier. He flew constantly, Manila to Cebu, Cebu to Davao, Davao to Hong Kong. He couldn't stop. The war had taught him that movement meant survival. Standing still meant death. Some of his pilots said Gunn was still fighting, still outrunning something. Maybe the memory of Sto Tomas, maybe the faces of the men who had flown his modified aircraft and never returned. On October 10, 1957, Gunn chartered a Beechcraft Model 18, a twin-engine plane, for a routine flight from Manila to Baguio, 140 miles north. The weather forecast warned of scattered thunderstorms over the Cordillera Mountains, but nothing severe. He filed his flight plan at 0800 hours, departure 9:30, expected arrival 1100. The tower cleared him for takeoff on 9:28. The weather worsened faster than predicted. By 10:30, the Cordillera Mountains were engulfed in heavy rain, low visibility, and turbulence. At 10:47, the Beechcraft's radio went silent. Search and rescue teams discovered the wreckage 3 days later on a mountainside near Baguio. The aircraft had flown directly into a violent storm cell. The pilots had tried to climb above the storm, but the winds drove the Beechcraft into the ridge. Impact was instant. Everyone aboard was killed. Paul Irvin Gunn died on October 11, 1957, just a week shy of his 58th birthday. The Philippine government honored him with a state funeral. 6,000 people attended. American veterans, Philippine Airlines employees, and former prisoners from Sto Tomas. General Kenny sent a wreath from the United States. The Manila Times published his obituary on October 12th. The headline read, "War Hero Dies in Plane Crash." The article listed his distinguished flying cross, his role in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, and his liberation missions over the Philippines. But it couldn't capture the full magnitude of his achievements. The numbers told part of the story. 5,000 B-25 strafers built with his modifications, 800 Japanese ships sunk, 2,000 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 85,000 enemy soldiers killed. Those were the official statistics. The real impact was far greater. Gunn's strafer concept had transformed the way air forces thought about bombers forever. Before Gunn, bombers simply dropped bombs from high altitude. After Gunn, bombers became multi-role weapons: strafing, skip bombing, close air support. The AC-130 gunship used in Vietnam descended directly from Gunn's B-25 modifications. So did the A-10 Warthog. So did nearly every modern attack aircraft with forward-firing guns. In 1948, North American Aviation hired Gunn as a consulting engineer. He worked on the B-45 Tornado jet bomber, advising on gun mounts and designing forward-firing armament packages. The company paid him handsomely, but he gave most of it to veteran organizations. His son, Nathaniel, followed in his father's footsteps, joining the Air Force and flying B-52s in Vietnam. He retired as a colonel and wrote a book about his father titled Pappy Gunn, published in 1994. It sold 12,000 copies, yet most Americans had never heard of Paul Gunn. Today, the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, displays one of Gunn's original gun-mounting drawings. The paper is yellowed, the measurements handwritten in pencil. It shows 4 .50-caliber guns inside an A-20 nose compartment. No stress calculations, no computer modeling, just the sketch that killed 8,000 Japanese soldiers in the Bismarck Sea. In 2008, the Air Force Association inducted Paul Gunn into the Air Force Enlisted Heritage Hall. The citation highlighted his innovations, his combat record, and his lasting influence on modern attack aviation. The ceremony took place in Washington, attended by 3 of his grandchildren. Philippine Airlines still operates today, flying to 42 destinations across Asia, Australia, and North America. At the Manila headquarters, a portrait of Gunn hangs in the main lobby, Most employees don't know who he is. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications to catch every forgotten story like this. Every day, we're uncovering forgotten stories from dusty archives. Stories of mechanics and innovators whose work saved thousands of lives with gun packages and field modifications. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, the Philippines. Our community spans the globe. You're not just a viewer. You're helping keep these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching and for making sure Pappy Gunn and heroes like him don't fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're part of that. Pappy's gunship had proven the doubters wrong, but this was only the beginning. Hit like and subscribe to follow more incredible stories from World War II.